News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on a farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Thank you for taking time out of your day to spend a couple of moments with us. We have a jam-packed show. You know, they said it was a deadline, a big deadline, a deadline that couldn't be altered. Until, of course, they decided that it could be altered. So, as usual, the Obama administration, they huff and they puff and they're going to blow your house down, just like in foreign policy. So many hard and fast deadlines are made, and those deadlines are willy-nilly simply ignored. This week, HHS Secretary did say that the March 31st deadline, which was supposed to be the last day for open enrollment onto the Obamacare website, now that deadline has been extended into until April 15. She was asked, well, how do you explain this? Is this an extension? Has there been a further delay? And this is her response.
It's none of the above. It's actually a very logical way to make sure people get through the system. What we did in December, we're doing again, which is to say if you're in line on March 31st at midnight, if you're trying to get through the system and the volume is higher than expected, we want to make sure you actually can complete the process and buy health insurance. Many, for the first time, affordable health care is available. So this is not an extension of open enrollment. It is just saying, like you do on Election Day, if you're in line to vote, we want to make sure you vote. These are people who want health insurance. They have an affordable option for the first time in their lives for many people who've never had affordable coverage in their workplace. We know that about 144,000 Michiganders have already chosen a health plan in the private market, but we're seeing an incredible interest. We had over 1 million visits to the website over the weekend, and we just want to make sure by midnight on the 31st that people have a chance to complete the process and get some affordable health care for themselves and their families.
Well, as usual, this is Obama speak. She says that this is actually, it's not an extension or a delay. It's just a logical way for people to enroll. Translation, they didn't get the numbers that they needed to get, that they promised us they would get. They said that we would have 7 million who would be fully enrolled by March 31st. And now they're desperate to see if 2 more weeks is going to save this sinking ship. Here to discuss how the president and his entire team are trashing our Constitution, rewriting laws at a whim, is a brilliant woman. This is Phyllis Schlafly. She is an American constitutional lawyer. She is a pioneer in the conservative movement. She has written 20 books. She has a report, which is now in its 41st year. She has a radio talk show. She is an expert on the Constitution, and she has testified before more than 50 congressional and state legislative committees. Here is the brilliant, incomparable Phyllis Schlafly. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello, Dr. Grace. Good to talk to you.
Well, great to talk to you. You are extremely alarmed at how the president is destroying our Constitution. Can you explain exactly what you see that is so threatening?
Yes, he is ignoring so many planks of the Constitution. For example, the Constitution says that all legislative power is in the Congress. And he has announced just publicly that he has a pen and he will just create laws by the use of his pen. And then the Constitution makes it the number one duty of the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And if he doesn't like a law, he's just not going to enforce it. And that's what he did with DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, and he instructed his attorney general not to enforce it.
Correct. Now, you have been a commentator on the political scene for decades. Have you ever seen a president behave this way?
No, I certainly haven't. Now, we have had a number of other presidents I haven't agreed with and whom I think have done things that are wrong or even illegal. But this present president delights in it, and he boasts about it. And we had a refutation by a distinguished law professor before the House Judiciary Committee recently, a liberal, who said he voted for Obama, but he's just shocked at what Obama is doing. Now, this professor pointed out that the Founding Fathers set up 3 branches of government. And the purpose of those 3 branches is so that if anyone gets too powerful, they'll be clamped down on by the other 2. And but Obama is destroying that. He thinks he can legislate as well as do other things that are not in the prerogative of the president.
What do you think that Congress should do in order to reclaim or readjust the balance?
Well, I think at the very least they should speak up. And as a matter of fact, this professor said when Obama announced that he could do anything he wanted to with his pen, he just was amazed that the whole Congress sat there in stony silence. You remember on a previous occasion when Obama said something illegal, a congressman named Joe, I've forgotten his last name, shouted out, "That's a lie."
Yeah, Joe Wilson, that's right.
Yes, and when Obama made his more outrageous remarks, nobody said anything. Somebody should have shouted out, "That's unconstitutional."
Right. Well, Congress is now going to try to challenge him in the courts. Do you think that that's a good way to proceed to shut down his abuse of executive power?
Well, I'm for trying the different ways, and I don't know if that'll be successful because the courts don't always do what I think they ought to do. But it's fine to file suit and see if you get anywhere with it.
Right. What about going to the extreme threatening impeachment? Do you think that that would be a mistake for the Republicans to do?
Yes, I do, because it's not going to succeed. The impeachment process is that the charges are brought by the House of Representatives. They impeach, but then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate can vote it up or down. And you know perfectly well that the Senate under Harry Reid is not going to approve impeachment.
Right. Should they
So I think that's really a dead-end road, and I don't favor wasting our time on that.
Right. But you think they should threaten it if, for example, they do win the Senate after the midterms? Do you think that they should go down that road, or is that too risky to try to impeach
Well, the problem is we have a president who is just so supported by the media that it doesn't make any difference what he does. The media are going to support him. And I think that is not a successful route. The best way is to elect a Republican Senate in November and then plan to elect a new president in 2 years.
Right. But it looks, though, that the precedent he set, now we have no guarantee that the next president isn't going to just follow in the same footsteps. That's why this is so dangerous.
Well, it is dangerous, but I don't think that that there's any reason to think that somebody we elect in 2 years would follow the same pattern. I hope it would be a Republican. I hope it would be somebody who respects the Constitution the way it was written, and I hope it would be somebody who doesn't try to rewrite the Constitution.
Now, why do you think that he has resorted to this draconian step of, he himself is a constitutional lawyer. Why is he doing this? It's going to discredit him in the long term. When the history books are written, this will definitely be a black stain on his presidency.
Well, I don't think he really cares about that. He's trained in the Saul Alinsky method of rabble rousing and creating local groups to accomplish their goals. And I don't think he has respect for the constitutional process. And I'm not convinced he really knows a lot about constitutional law. He's never been willing to let his grades be made public. We do not know if he really did have the grades to get into Columbia University or into the Harvard Law School.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So when you say that what you really want Congress to do is to speak out on the issue, do you think they should go so far as to make it a campaign issue in the midterms?
Absolutely. I think it's a big campaign issue. And I make the Democratic senators who are up for election say they're for or against what Obama's doing, and then judge accordingly, vote accordingly.
Right.
I think it's terribly important for Congress to speak up and speak out.
And you have chronicled, it's not just Obamacare where he has basically abused his executive authority. He's done it on a whole range of issues. Can you explain to the audience all the areas in which he's done this?
Well, take Obamacare, for example. He has changed the language. You remember when Obamacare was passed, and Nancy Pelosi says, well, you'll know what's in it after we pass it. And then when people started to point out things that were wrong with it, his friends kept saying, it's the law of the land, you have to obey it. Well, now, according to one good observer, he has made, I think it's 37 changes in it by the stroke of his pen that were changes in the law, the way it was passed by Congress. Now, that's not legal, not constitutional. He shouldn't have done it. Maybe some of the changes were good, but if they were good, Congress should have done them, not the president by the stroke of his pen.
Exactly. And I was asking, there's a whole other range of examples. I mean, he basically acted unilaterally on the DREAM Act.
That's right.
Through regulation.
The Constitution says that all legislative power is in the Congress. And Congress considered the DREAM Act and refused to pass it. So Obama decided he would just legislate it with the stroke of his pen. Exactly. And, of course, that's completely unconstitutional. He could not and should not have done that.
Right.
And then likewise with cap and trade, which is to set up some regulations in the field of regulation. And Congress wouldn't pass it, so he went ahead and did it with the stroke of his pen.
Right. He did the same thing by refusing to fully execute the Defense of Marriage Act, and then he instructed the Attorney General to tell the states that they don't necessarily have to defend marriage laws. So there's been a whole range of examples, and it is, as you say, really alarming. And as the professor pointed out, Jonathan Turley, who testified, he said that what we're also seeing is not just the president abusing his executive authority, it's that now there's the emergence of a fourth branch, which is using regulation to almost pass basically take over the role of Congress by passing regulations.
That's right. He thinks he can do it in the executive branch with the use of regulations. And I saw on television the other night the Obamacare law is about 1,000 pages, and you saw a stack of 1,000 pages. But then the regulations to implement it are, I think, 12,000. So it's a tremendous tower of paper that has been concocted by Obama friends in the regulatory departments, and they think they can put that over on us, and it'll have the force of law, and they can just legislate new portions of Obamacare.
Right. Well, we are certainly at a constitutional tipping point, as that professor said. And if we don't take a stand, then we are going to destroy the fabric of the greatest republic the world has ever known. Thank you so much. This has been a conversation with the illustrious Phyllis Schlafly. She is...
And let me tell you to go on our website,
Sure.
eagleforum.org.
Eagle Forum, yes. You can read all her writings on eagleforum.org. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, you heard it from a long-term observer of the political scene. His behavior is beyond the pale, unlike what any other president has ever done. And during the midterms, we should make it a major campaign slogan. Respect our Constitution. You're listening to Dr. Grace on American Heartland.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome to American Heartland. I am the editor of Politics and Culture, WorldTribune.com, and I uphold values that will never, ever die. You all out there know that I have been passionate about one cause in particular since this show began, and that is justice for Navy SEAL Team 6. There were 30 American service members who died in a helicopter crash in August of 2011. We were initially all very excited when we got a congressional investigation into that crash, but unfortunately, that congressional investigation turned out to be a giant whitewash. And we continue to follow the story as the families that lost loved ones are demanding a better inquiry and demanding answers to their questions. Tonight, we are joined by Mr. Charles Strange. He is here to give us his reaction to the congressional investigation and the next steps that the families are taking. Welcome to the show, Mr. Strange.
Hello, Dr. Grace. Thank you for having us on.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. So first, give me your reaction to the congressional hearing. Were you present that day?
Yes, I was.
And tell me what you saw and what was going through your head.
Anger, frustration, sadness. 10 days before the hearing, they said the parents weren't allowed to ask any questions, and that put up a red flag. The parents sent in over 1,000 questions, and Congress was supposed to read them. I don't think any of them read them, except for Micah from Florida. He threw a couple shots out there, but and the people that came from the military, they were all just hired in 2012. If you look at some of them, not all of them, but some of them, they didn't have a clue what it was about.
Indeed, and I read the report, and I wrote an article saying essentially that report was a huge whitewash. Almost every aspect, every decision that had been made that night, they concurred that it was the right decision, which is preposterous. Can you tell the audience what are some of the questions that are still bubbling at the forefront of your mind that you really want to get the answers to?
Who set my son up? Michael was part of SEAL Team 6, the gold team, for 4 years. And when he was home in June 2011, it was the first time he talked about a will. And he talked about the will 3 times to me and to my sister. And next thing you know, he came, I get the knock on the door that my son gets killed with 29 other brave Americans. So what? There's a leak somewhere. Somebody leaked something to Karzai leaked it to the Taliban. They were sitting there waiting for them.
Yeah,
who put them all in the Chinook?
Who put them all there? Obviously, the family believes it was an ambush and there was some sabotage. Where do we go from here? So the congressional investigation was a whitewash. What now? What are you all doing now?
I went to Pennsylvania Congressman Bob Brady, and he's on the Armed Service Committee. And he wrote a letter to Chuck Hagel, Secretary of Defense, demanding that the parents can ask questions and get some kind of closure.
Right. And
so,
is there any hope?
For me, somebody has to go to jail. This wasn't, an accident, and this was a planned ambush. Somebody leaked the information.
Yeah, and from everything that I know, that you and the families are very close to some sources. People have contacted you, perhaps even anonymously. Do you think that the sabotage was purely within Afghanistan, or was there a link to Washington?
From one of the sources, they said the call came from Washington.
Ooh, do they have any evidence to back that up?
Yeah, but they're afraid to talk because of what happened to SEAL Team 6 and some other things. And
now, does this source know that for a fact, or is that merely speculation and conjecture?
It's fact.
Wow, that is giving me chills. Well, I got to tell you something. The one thing that I found most alarming when I read the story and then later on did some research, it's that if you go back and look at that date, August 6th, that is the day that Congress went out of session that year. And if you know how Washington works, when Congress goes out of session, usually so does the entire press corps. So when I heard about this helicopter crash later, much later, I asked myself, well, wait a minute, how come I didn't report on it at the time? How come none of my media friends reported on the time? And when I looked at the calendar, I thought, oh my goodness, it's because that's when most journalists, we all take a break. We're so exhausted that everybody just leaves the city. And that's why for so long, the media ignored the story until you families brilliantly called attention to it by holding a press conference at the National Press Club. But that fact, the fact that that crash occurred August 6, 2011, I always thought the date itself, I mean, if you're talking about an ambush, the date to me was very telling because that's how it escaped attention for so long, the date that was chosen for it to happen. If you believe that this was actually done, if it was a planned ambush, then that date, I think, also speaks volumes.
Absolutely. There was Taliban along the tree line, like 30 of them. There was Taliban by this house with a 50-foot tower, like 30 of them. And then there was some to the north, set up like a triangle. And they sent these guys right in the middle. And here you go. You ready for this one? The 4 eyes in the sky, the cameras on the drones, just happened to have a glitch in the camera when my son got killed.
It's too crazy. And the fact that the black box mysteriously disappeared. And first they said that the black box had just washed away in a flood. Then, after the families kept pressing for answers, the latest thing that I read in the report was they said, well, there was no black box at all.
Right.
Yeah, which is another very alarming inconsistency.
Well, if you look up Chinook's 47D and you go to AV1, regulations 95 in the Army, it talks about 3 different kinds of black boxes. One of them's in the Chinook helicopter. And the guy, Mr. Reed, said no black box. But there is a recording device. It's actually in the 1,300 pages. There was one, they seen it. They seen it by the pilot's foot, but they couldn't get to it.
Yeah, and that's a whole string of inconsistencies. And another inconsistency is those 7 Afghans who were swapped out. At the hearings, you were told that actually there was a group that went with the Rangers, and then another group was just chosen at the last minute to compensate for the 7 that had gone on another mission with the Rangers. Again, if this is true, you guys would have been told that within the first week or 2, not years later.
Not 30 months later, all of a sudden they came up with that. Yeah, that was another piece of our heart ripped out, like all the, you got to be kidding me with this story now.
So when you guys were all at the congressional hearing and you're hearing all of this, didn't any of you call out at the time and react in outrage right then and there?
I had my wife, Michael's stepmom, and I had Dina James from Larry Clayman's office patting me down. Don't say nothing. No, this could be the first of many. Because I was going to get up and walk out quite a few times. Like I said, you got to be kidding me. And then actually, when it was over, Jason came over to me, Chavez, and Chaffetz, and I said, what papers is this guy reading? He's not close to anything. Reed, the guy from the military. he was just,
He had
groomed to put
retired
up
since
there.
2007. What was most striking about the hearing was they didn't call anybody to testify that was actually in the chain of command that night. That's the most shocking thing of all.
Dr. Grace, that month, August 2011, Admiral Eric Olson leaves. Admiral Mike Miller. General David Petraeus, 10 days afterwards, he leaves. Then Benghazi happens. Votel, Pybus, McCraven comes in. But most of them all just either retired or got switched out. Van Hoosen, right? V-A-N Hoosen, 4-star. He was a big shot with the SEALs. He's gone. All that month.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that report at? Them got, So that's,
Right. So what are you hearing now? Is this, as your lawyer was telling you, hey, this is going to be one of many hearings, or is that definitive? Are they going to try to sweep it under? What's your sense? Do you think that they feel like they cried their crocodile tears? I know Mr. Representative Chaffetz actually cried during the hearing. They cried their crocodile tears and that's it. They're going to bury this? Or do you think that with enough pressure, you guys are going to be able to get a second crack at this?
I believe we're going to get a second crack at it, where the parents can ask questions, and they actually, subpoena, like you just said.
They've got to subpoena people. They absolutely subpoena the people that were in the chain of command that night. That's who you got to talk to. In fact, at this point, we don't even know who gave the orders, right?
Right.
And that is the most question.
Yes.
Indeed. Now tell us a little bit about the lawsuit that is ongoing. Where do you stand in the lawsuit? Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Look, Obama went on his European tour. He's in Brussels.
A lot of people never heard of it.
We played that song because that's Larry Klayman,
his
the author
speech
representing the families.
in Brussels was like a kumbaya moment.
He gave a huge history lesson, one that was full of historical inaccuracies, by the way.
From 1960,
and the gist of it was that NATO is strong and NATO's going to stand together.
Obama
but
just
this
said,
is the key. This is the key theme of his
Russia,
speech: is that
$1 billion
essentially
about 6 months
human beings
ago
want
to
freedom.
build helicopters
These
for the Afghan
ideals
National
are
Army.
so
And when they asked
powerful
the Afghans,
that
they
they
wanted
become
any Chinooks.
inevitable.
They
And
said,
so
no, we don't want none of
Russia's
them.
behavior is
So, they know.
wrong.
So
Soon
something has to
history
be
will
done,
show them that they're
and I
wrong.
believe to
The
bring
people
more
are going to
attention
rise
and to
up
help
because
us get more
they're
answers
so
is the
desperate
whole
for freedom,
thing with
and
the
freedom
lawsuits
is what
and,
changes
hopefully
history
drag some of these people in that disappeared.
is the hallmark of historical progress. So essentially, he believes that these ideals are so powerful they're going to eventually triumph. That's the gist of this ridiculous speech that he gave in Brussels. And he really thought that he was going to gin up that old magic where the Europeans revere him, where the world reveres him. It really didn't happen. And as he's talking about the growth of these ideals, the spread of these ideals, the beauty of these ideals, he also, at one point, tries to give, guess what, another warning that if Putin goes too far, well, the NATO countries are going to band together and resist him. Listen to this.
No mistake.
Thank you, Dr.
Neither
Grace.
the United
Thank
States
you
so much.
nor
Thank
Europe
you so much
has
for
any
being on
interest
the
in
air. God
controlling
bless you, and
Ukraine.
take good care.
We have sent no troops there.
Thank you. Bye.
So this,
What we want
again,
is
is
for
a
the
story
Ukrainian people to
that
make their own
we
decisions,
have followed and will continue to
just
follow.
like other free people
and
around the
you heard
world.
it here, right from the father of Michael Strange.
Understand
one
as
of the
well, this is not
victims.
another Cold
An
War that we're
anonymous
entering into.
source is saying that
After all,
Washington
unlike the
had
Soviet
a hand
Union,
in it.
Russia leads no bloc of nations, no global ideology. The United States and NATO do not seek any conflict with Russia. For more than 60 years, we have come together in NATO, not to claim other lands, but to keep nations free.
Issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
What we will do, always, is uphold our solemn obligation, our Article 5 duty to defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our allies. And in that promise, we will never waver. NATO nations never stand alone.
So at this point, he has no credibility. It almost doesn't matter what he says. And even though he's threatening the use of force in the future if Putin goes too far, the speech contained such weak and historically inaccurate comments that nobody is going to be afraid of him. At one point, he said that the Cold War was won, quote unquote, not by tanks or missiles, but because of ideals. And he says that these ideas and ideals stirred the Hungarians, the Poles, the Czechs, all of these people, the East Berliners, to seek freedom and to basically free themselves. But has he forgotten the nuclear weapons that we had, which we kept building and building and building and threatening the Russians with? Freedom was upheld precisely by tanks and missiles. And if it wasn't for our nuclear arsenal, we would never have won that Cold War. Reagan brilliantly bankrupted the Soviet Union in an arms race. And freedom was kept alive in the Western world precisely because we had the armaments to resist the strongmen. So he really came across as a college student, a C college student. I watched the speech, and I could see in his body language that he thought by some of the platitudes that he said that he was going to get rousing applause. You know, he said stuff like, "The future is ours," these kinds of nonsensical statements. Statements like, the way forward is to show respect towards immigrants and gay people. And if we do that, then we are going to win the contest of ideas. And this is, quote unquote, who we are. All of these platitudes that perhaps in 2008 people would fawn over. Now, even in Europe, he is basically like a thin piece of paper. Everybody can see right through him. The words ring hollow. So I gather he thought he was going to get some kind of grand standing ovation, be perceived as the Gandhi of our time with this, poem to peace, essentially. That's what I call this speech. And instead, the audience just applauded in a very lukewarm way. Well, the president wasn't done on his European tour. He didn't quite get that magic feeling. So you know what? He decided to go and see Pope Francis. Yes, he's crushing the Christians at home, enacting laws that basically go contrary to religious freedom, both in the military and with the healthcare law. But, he doesn't mind going to visit the Vatican, and he hopes that perhaps some of Pope Francis's popularity might be like fairy dust, which can be sprinkled upon him too. It reminded me of that old feeling we used to get when we saw Obama in 2008. That old magic feeling that he's trying very hard to get.
Hey B, it's me.
You remember this?
If you're there, pick up.
Obama girl, where are you?
C-SPAN. Anyway, call me back. You seem to float onto the floor. Democratic Convention 2004.
Boy, that sounds like so long ago.
More than I want you. So I put down my carry sign. Knew I had to make you mine. Smile black and sexy, you're so fine. 'Cause I gotta cry. Obama, wait till 2008. Baby, you're the best candidate.
You remember that, don't you? Well, he tried. He tried so hard. Maybe he was trying to get a European Obama girl to do something on YouTube. It didn't work. In fact, not only are the Europeans not impressed, he's beginning to make a fool of himself. And even the liberal press corps is beginning to ask him tough questions. I think this was the most delicious question of his trip. It's from ABC News' Jonathan Karl. Roll it, Brittany.
Mr. President, thank you. In China, in Syria, in Egypt, and now in Russia, we've seen you make strong statements, issue warnings that have been ignored. Are you concerned that America's influence in the world, your influence in the world, is on the decline? And in the light of recent developments Do you think Mitt Romney had a point when he said that Russia is America's biggest geopolitical foe? If not Russia, who? And Mr. Prime Minister, do you think these sanctions will change Vladimir Putin's calculation, will cause him to back down? And do you see where do you see a Russian red line where if they go any further, if they go into eastern Ukraine, into Moldova, where options beyond sanctions have to be considered?
Well, I'm sure that he was stunned. The fawning press corps is actually asking a half-decent question, and this is his response.
Well, Jonathan, I think if the premise of the question is that whenever the United States objects to an action and other countries don't immediately do exactly what we want, that's been the norm, that would pretty much erase most of 20th century history. I think that there's a distinction between us being very clear about what we think is an appropriate action, what we stand for, what principles we believe in, versus what is, I guess, implied in the question, that we should engage in some sort of military action to prevent something. The truth of the matter is that the world's always been messy. And what the United States has consistently been able to do, and we continue to be able to do, is to mobilize the international community around a set of principles and norms. And where our own self-defense may not be involved, we may not act militarily. That does not mean that we don't steadily push against those forces that would violate those principles and ideals that we care about.
We lead the international community. We set the mold. We set the standard. We set the agenda. That's what previous presidents understood. Instead, what is he doing? He even insulted Russia by at some point saying, we don't have too much to worry about Russia. Russia's not a global power. Russia is a regional power, and Russia is doing this out of weakness. Out of weakness. Russia is invading Crimea out of weakness, he basically said. A preposterous statement. And on Fox News, Colonel Ralph Peters rightly took the president to task.
I'm trying to say that we can't just focus on the headline topic of the day. American national security has to address a range of global threats. And that said, I was certainly mortified by the inanity and the ludicrous nature of President Obama's remarks in the Netherlands yesterday.
Well, that's an interesting point, because he basically said three things, and he's trying to minimize Putin in his comments. He called it a regional power, not a superpower, referring to Russia. Said they're threatening their immediate neighbors. I thought that was an interesting choice of words there. And he also said Russia's acting out of weakness, which is something he has said for some time now. Do you have any problem with those word choices?
Well, they're idiotic. First of all, it shows our president's utter historical illiteracy. When he tries to dismiss Russia as a regional power, he tends to forget that Nazi Germany was a regional power, and they gave us World War II in Europe and the Holocaust. Japan wasn't a global power, it was a regional power, and it gave us Pearl Harbor. So this trying to poo-poo any real danger from Russia is absolutely ridiculous. And even beyond that, this idea that Putin is acting from weakness. Look, Putin just dismembered a country, took Crimea. We can't get him out of there. We're afraid of the guy, and he's weak. I mean, Obama just got mugged, and he's claiming the mugger did it out of weakness.
I have rarely heard a commentator use words like that, ludicrous, idiocy, but they're appropriate. And we completely concur. Russia is a global power with tremendous reach, and it is a dark cloud on the horizon. President Barack Obama, know your enemy. You're listening to Dr. Grace. I am the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, upholding values that will never die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. And you're hearing Phil Collins, an easy lover. That's the theme of this segment, and you'll soon find out why. But first, I want to give kudos to Bernie Goldberg, who, when asked by a question on Bill O'Reilly, on the O'Reilly Factor, Bill O'Reilly asked him a question about the denigration of the media. He said something absolutely brilliant. Listen to this.
Do anything. You'll do anything to get viewers.
Right.
That, you just can't. And that's why I spoke out so harshly about it. Now, let's take it a step further. You believe that this diminishment of the journalism industry, began with the election of President Obama?
I don't know if it began, but it certainly got noticeably worse. Journalists traditionally chronicle the news. They chronicle history. But when Barack Obama came along, because he was a historical figure, they decided they wanted to help shape history. And I think they moved from covering the news to wanting to shape the news. And they, most importantly, they went from old-fashioned media bias, which has been around for a while, to media activism.
And that is a very brilliant point. I'm asked a lot of times, what's the difference now, Dr. Grace, regarding how the media is behaving? Hasn't media bias always been around? The difference is you now have media activism. They're actually cheering for one side. They're promoting one side. They're working for one side. They're almost the appendages of a political movement. So there's no objectivity, no independence from the subject that they're analyzing. That is a key phrase that we're going to use again and again on this show. What you're seeing during the Obama administration is pure and simple media activism. And that is why we need more outlets like American Heartland, more good newspapers across the country to fill the void of a media class that is literally deteriorating right before our eyes. Well, this week, there's a crazy article on Huffington Post. And it's written by somebody who likes to give advice to divorced people. It's basically, they looped it from a site, divorcedmoms.com. And this article talks about having a friend with benefits. It's called 5 Benefits of Having a Friend with Benefits. I have to tell you, this term has come around perhaps in the last 5-6 years. I can tell you when I was growing up, I never heard it. When I began dating as a teenager, I never heard it. I know many of you out there never experienced this concept. And suddenly, it's all over the place. It's in movies, it's in print. It's this crazy idea that you can have casual sex and there's no consequence at all by this casual sexual behavior, even with a very good friend. And let me give you a couple of examples of movies that have been touting this. One of them, a couple years ago, No Strings Attached. Listen to this.
8 hours a week. I need someone who's going to be in my bed at 2 a.m. who I don't have to eat breakfast with.
I hate breakfast.
Good.
Mr. Memo, where are you?
You want to come back strong here. Like, where am I? Why don't you check your underpants?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't write that.
Maybe we should establish ground rules. No lying, no jealousy. Don't list me as your emergency contact. I won't call.
Don't ask me what I think about your body.
Deal.
So that was No Strings Attached. And the premise of that movie is that people engage in a relationship that is purely sexual and they're not supposed to have any emotions. Even Hollywood concluded, you know what? In the end, these characters have to feel something for one another. They couldn't go all the way. And there was another movie with Mila Kunis and Justin Timberlake. It was called Friends with Benefits. This is the trailer.
I'm done with the relationship thing. I'm emotionally unavailable.
I'm emotionally damaged.
You know what's that?
No emotions, just sex.
So I guess we should just start.
Bedroom.
What's wrong with the couch?
The bedroom has better light. And since we're just friends, I don't have to be insecure about my body.
Come on, you're beautiful. You have nothing to be insecure.
That sounds emotionally supportive. Lock that down.
Yeah.
So here's this crazy idea. I don't really know where it came from. And now you have this article being touted. This is now catered not just towards the young. So now we're pushing this notion towards people that were previously divorced. And the advice that is given is, go ahead. There's so many advantages to just having somebody that you have sexual relations with that's a friend that you are not actually emotionally involved with. What are the advantages? The article says, well, at least this is a friend, somebody that you get along with. You can experiment sexually with that friend because you're not really emotionally invested. And sex has its perks, quote unquote. You feel better. You feel physically better. You feel giddy. You feel euphoric. They do tell you should practice safe sex. But one of the advantages is also that you can be very, very free to try explore any aspect of your sexuality that you may have been constrained to try when, as I said before, you're emotionally invested. So they go on and on about feeling completely free. And when it no longer suits you to simply have a friend with benefits, you can just ditch that person and it's no big deal. And this can actually help you heal from your divorce. But it goes on to say, well, wait a minute, there are some dangers. Now listen to this. Danger number 1, do you tend to be jealous? Personally, I haven't met anybody who isn't jealous. I've had girlfriends who say they're not going to be jealous, and then when they're involved with somebody, they're jealous. And jealousy is a natural, almost unavoidable human emotion in all relationships. Another danger, do you always associate sex with love? Everybody I know does. Even those who say they're not going to eventually do. Do you fall head over heels for good sexual partners? Well, most men and women do fall head over heels for good sexual partners. And the last danger, does he have romantic feelings for you, whether you reciprocate or not? So those are the dangers according to the brilliance of the Huffington Post. Look, it is very difficult for men and women to remain friends, period. I'm very old-fashioned in that regard. And I tell you what, most often, one person or the other does end up having romantic feelings. And that is because that is human nature. That is the way God made us as man and woman to be drawn to one another. But you know what else I discovered in the course of my life? Sometimes you can develop a platonic relationship with a member of the opposite sex, but I would still say don't invest too much time and effort into it, and I'll tell you why. Because eventually that person is going to fall in love, and that woman is not going to tolerate you in that person's life because she will be too jealous of his friendship. I've seen that happen over and over again. So there are certain rules of the game that human nature has laid out. And when you try to cross out these rules, all that ends up happening is one or both of you end up with a huge broken heart. It's unavoidable. And why is it unavoidable? Because we do not leave our emotions at the door. We do not leave our brain at the door when we jump into the bedroom. In fact, it is the brain that is the biggest sex organ. And the brain and the emotions, they all mix together to create chemistry, an attraction for somebody else. We are not merely animals who can mate and step aside. Such idiocy. Well, speaking of idiocy, we have two other idiots this week. They are Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin. They have been married 10 years. They have 2 children. And they are, quote unquote, consciously uncoupling. In other words, they're divorcing. So they posted this explanation. They're saying that their hearts are filled with sadness, etc., etc. But they also want everybody to understand that they will always be a family. And in many ways, they're closer than we ever have been. That is ridiculous. I have never heard of 2 people divorcing who with a straight face can say that they're now closer than they've ever been. They go on to say we are parents first and foremost to two wonderful children. Well, listen, if you're parents first and foremost to these two children, you would put your ego aside, you would put your problems aside, you would resolve them for the sake of those children. They have two kids that are very young. One is 9 and one is 7. So what a disgrace. And it's all the more disgraceful because Gwyneth Paltrow has presented herself as an individual who gives advice. And she has a website called Goop. And what kind of advice has she given on marriage? She has said things like, I'm a great romantic, but I also think you can be a romantic and a realist. Life is complicated and long, and I know people that I respect and admire and I look up to who have had extramarital affairs. That's her advice. Basically, if you're in a marriage and you have extramarital affairs, somehow that's okay. You can still be admirable. Well, look where it got you. Rumors are that she has had a string of extramarital affairs, including she was caught kissing on camera at a ball game with her ex-boyfriend, Donovan Light. That might have been the final straw. She also once said, this is another piece of advice, her husband is like a mad scientist, a genius songwriter. So I never say, where are you? You should be home by now. I never place demands on him because I think he's a really talented man and he's putting something good into the world. This is a recipe for divorce. That is exactly the advice that she has given. If you don't ask your man, where are you, where you're going, if you think he can just roam the world without you being there and you don't even have to know, you're heading in one direction, and that is the divorced court. So Gwyneth Paltrow basically has been knocked off her high horse. Obviously, all of her quote-unquote advice is a piece of garbage. You know where it leads? It leads to a family breakdown, and sadly, the two victims of her twisted advice are going to be her very own flesh and blood. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, and I am upholding values that will never, ever die.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell everyone. I was born by God's dear grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.